All right, fourth graders, we are ready in our new module, Module 6, Lesson 1, and we are going to be looking at tenths as decimals. So once you get that table of contents done, go ahead and flip her over and we will get started with our lesson today. This might look familiar from what we've started in Decimal Boot Camp, so today will be a little bit of a review. Our objective says, I can explain the relationship between a fraction and a decimal. And so remember that a decimal is like a fraction because it shows parts of a whole. So a decimal is just like a fraction because it's not quite a whole number, it's less than a whole. And so we have a couple of things on our first page of notes today. We've got a tape diagram, we've got a number line, we've got some blank lines, and then we've got space underneath. So we're going to do a couple of things. And the first thing is we're going to look at our decimal and our fraction form of tenths. And so we're going to talk about that in detail today, and we'll use tenths. Now if I shaded one piece of this tape diagram, I know, because we are experts in fractions now, that that is 1/10, and we know that we write it just like this. I also know that this spot on a number line is called 1/10, and I write it as a fraction like this. We also can be reminded from our boot camp that when I write a decimal, I have a whole number, a decimal point, and then comes my tenth. So I'm going to use this empty space down here, and I'm going to write, I have my whole number, so I'm going to write my W. I'm going to write a decimal. Sorry, that doesn't look quite like a W. A whole number, a decimal, and then I use my tenth. And that's where we're at today. So we're going to go ahead and fill all the way in on my number line and this tape diagram in decimal form and fraction form until I get to one whole. So you can go ahead and do that with me. I don't have any holes, but now I have 2 tenths. 2/10. 0 holes, 3 tenths. Write it as a fraction, 3 tenths. You can go carry on with me as we fill in, and we can see that decimals is just another way to write a fraction because it is part of a whole. So when I write the number up above in decimal form, it is equal to the fraction form that I am writing below. And I know that when I get to 1, I would write it like this. Here's my 1 whole. I can put my decimal and a 0 behind it. And when I write that as a fraction, I know that is 10 tenths makes a whole. So we are familiar with our tenth pieces, and that when I do fractions, I have a whole number, a decimal, and then I always have a tenth is first. So we're going to flip to our next note page, and as we practice with decimals today, we're also going to bring back some measurement, and we're going to look at using liters and kilograms and centimeters, and so we'll want to make sure that we have that label on there as we are working today. And so I'm going to look at these pictures, and what is happening is I can see that I have a bottle here, and I have 1 liter, and then there's parts, and I have a decimal labeled here, but I want to know if I were to write that in a fraction form and a decimal form, so I can compare that relationship between my fraction and a decimal. So when I look at this line here is 0.5 or 5 tenths liters. So I'm going to count up and see how full this is. Here's 6 tenths, 7 tenths, and here's my line at 8 tenths. Now since I'm saying it out loud, I know that as a fraction I would write it like this, 8 tenths. We're super familiar with fractions. Now as a decimal form, I would write 0 holes, decimal, 8 tenths. Okay. This time I notice that my bottle is empty, but it's given me my decimal form of my amount. So I need to fill up that bottle. And I read this as 3 tenths because I see it's right behind my decimal. So I'm going to fill up, here's 1 tenth, here's 2 tenths, and here is 3 tenths. So I'm going to shade all the way up to 3 tenths. And now I need to write that as a fraction, 3 tenths. Saying it out loud helps when I get to that fraction piece. Now as I look at this scale, I want to know how much this jar of pickles and yogurt weigh. And it tells me in fraction form, but now on a scale it wants to tell me I need to fill in the decimal form. So if 6/10, I know that I don't have a whole. Then comes my decimal, and tenths is the next place value, so I would put a 6 to show 6/10. All right, let's move on over. Now here's the next part. We're going to come back to the table in just a minute. We're going to look down here next. Okay? And what I want us to recognize is that as I get closer, and I'm going to come back to this page really quickly, fourth graders. As I get closer to a whole, sometimes I want to know how much more do I need to get to one whole. So if I were to shade in just 1/10, and I asked you, fourth grade, how many more do I need to equal a whole? I know there would be 9/10 more. And so that's what we're going to look at here on these problems. Is it asks me, I have 3/10 centimeters plus something equals 1 centimeter. So how many more do I need to get to one whole? I have 3. I need 7/10 centimeters more to equal one whole. I know that when I add fractions, 3 plus 7 equals that 10/10. 1 centimeter is 10/10. So I have these all written in fraction form, so I want my missing piece to be written in fraction form. Again, now I have 8/10 centimeters plus something equals 1 centimeter. Well, I know I need to get to 10/10 centimeters, and so 8 plus 2/10 centimeters equals 1. All right, so now we're going to do that same thing, but this time notice the difference. Here I had fraction form. Now I'm going to write it in decimal form. So before I had 3/10 centimeter as a fraction, now I have, looking at a decimal, 3/10. Well, I know that I need 7/10. So when we write that as a decimal, 0 wholes, 7/10 come after that decimal. Down here again, 8/10 centimeters plus something equals 1 whole. I know I don't have any wholes. I needed 2 more tenths to fill in. Okay? So now here's our last part, because again, we're understanding that relationship. That's our objective today. So we have unit form. I'm going to put some labels. I have unit form. Remember, that's a number and word. I have fractions, and I have decimal form. And so I want to find the match that belongs. So I can say 2/10 in unit form. Here's 2/10 as a fraction. Here's 2/10 as a decimal. So let's find those matches. I need 4/10, so I know that's going to look like 4 over 10, 4/10. And then I look again, oh, matches right here, equals 4/10. All right, let's move to our next one, 6/10 as a fraction. Here we are, 6/10 as a decimal. Okay. 7/10 as a fraction, 7 in my numerator, 10 in my denominator. 7/10 as a decimal, I know that first digit after a decimal would be 7. And 5/10 is our last one. Here's 5/10, and my last 5/10 right here. So we'll be matching. Nice job recognizing that relationship today between decimal and fraction.